Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tell Not Show. As always, we are your hosts. We have the wonderful Kirsha Fox, uh, author of Son of Deception and The White Leaf Child. She's a homeschooling mom of four, avid gamer, and reader.
And my co-host is Julia J.K. Allen, author, editor, and author coach. She's a fantasy and horror author who loves to sprinkle magic on everything. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, and we're very excited to welcome our guests on tonight. If you want to tell us about them, Kirsha?
Yes, Moshaty is an Afro-Latina screenwriter, author, and producer. Raised within the clash of her mother's Yaqui heritage and her father's strict Southern Baptist upbringing, Mo's work contains worlds in which characters of color strive for identity, sentiment, and belonging, all within comedy, horror, and sci-fi genres.
Yes, very excited to have you on the show tonight. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your writing journey? What got you started in writing, and how has it gone for you?
Wow. Well, we're going back quite a ways. I was born in the late 70s. My mother, I was the last daughter of, I have two older sisters. I was the baby, and my parents got divorced very young. So we were kind of latchkey kids. My mother went to work in the daytime and went to night school in order to get her degree and kind of just move forward in society and, get obviously better jobs in the early 80s, which for women wasn't a lot to go on outside of secretarial stuff. So she really strived to just do as much as she can to bring us up. But like I said, I was a latchkey kid. So I was 5 years younger than my middle sister. So I really kept to myself, and I was writing, I guess, in that time, what we call now fan fiction. So after a movie ended, a fantasy movie or a scary movie ended, I would continue writing the stories of the characters that I really fell in love with in the movies. And that's really what began me kind of just writing and building worlds and continuing stories, and also sneaking my oldest sister's horror and sci-fi books and reading those. So really that's where my writing journey began. I wrote all through middle school, grammar school, high school, into college. I got my first published piece when I was in high school. It was a short story called The Shallows. And it was about these little kids that skip school one day and they go wading in this creek. And at the bottom of the creek, there's another little boy in the creek. So it was great. It was so fun to get that published. And then there was a camp of being like, this is a little too strong for, your age. Like, are you okay? Talk to your mom about things. But it was fun. And I was really, really supported by my creative writing teacher, which I don't think that I would ever have the guts to do what I've done in these last 20 years with my writing, without that push and that support.
Oh my gosh. Great teachers make the world of difference. I really,
100%.
Really feel that. Just like you said, the support that they offer and the encouragement is invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I love, I can relate to sneaking in scary books as as someone who's probably too young for them. I think I discovered Stephen King in middle school, and I was just like, oops, yeah.
100%. I feel like you talk to any horror fan and it's like, oh, you were 5 when you watched The Shining? Makes sense. Like, checks out.
I was like 2 when I saw my first horror movie. Yeah, and I just remember sitting through peeking through my mom's fingers, and yes, but I was hooked.
Yeah, and I just feel like that's for this genre, even like sci-fi and things like Aliens and The Thing. I remember being very young and watching those. And I think what's so funny about this genre is that we've not necessarily desensitized ourselves to it, but I feel like it's almost created like a floodgate where it's like, as a child, you realize what you're scared of, and we invent things to be scared of as kids. Everything's kind of scary because you're little, you don't really know any better. But I feel like being confronted with all of these, quote unquote monsters early on, kind of really does something to our brain. It just either helps us be a little bit more creative, and I think relating to other horror fans is really super easy. I mean, I don't really know if anybody bonds over like drama. Maybe they do.
Right.
Maybe there's a group for that. I don't want to yuck anybody's yum.
Right.
But I think that it makes it definitely more excitable to meet somebody, you know, meeting another horror fan or meeting another sci-fi fan is just like, well, what's your favorite? Let's talk about
Right.
it. And you have like a
Right.
natural, smooth camaraderie to it. I always thought that was very, very cool.
Yeah, I love that.
I think it's probably a little bit harder to find people who enjoy your genre of horror. So when you do
Right.
find them, you're like, we're friends, you know.
Yeah.
Besties for life. Yes.
Yeah, and it's the accessibility standpoint. I mean, the genre's kind of always been pushed to the fringes of,
Yes.
you know, Academy Awards, you know, Emmys, things of that. You know, the award season
Right.
come up as like really, it's very barren for horror until we started getting things like Get Out and
Yes.
you know, things like that where it's like it's a psychological horror, which I feel like does better in that type of
Right.
arena than something like, I don't know, Saw.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's just and what's nice about it is there's so many subgenres to horror as well that you can
Right.
always find your niche.
Mhm.
Yeah. So obviously you consumed a lot of the genres that you write, but is there a particular reason why you write the genres that you do? Like, is there a certain draw to them that really pulled you in?
Yeah, I think that I just really love the horror genre, mostly because of the excessive subgenres to it. You really can go anywhere. A scare is a scare, you know, it's very individuals. It's very individualistic. Like it's what scares me is not what's going to scare you. And a lot of that is deep seated in our own experiences before we got to the story. And I think
Right.
what's so cool about that is creating a world that kind of plays off your past a little bit before you even step into it. So I'm creating a story. It's, you know, a psychological story about, you know, somebody that's trapped or somebody that's, you know, stuck at a, you know, a rest stop and they don't have a way out. Like we all have that innate fear inside of us with being like, I can't get out. I can't get anywhere. We all have that fear going in to that movie, and that movie or reading that story, because the genre gets to play on the fear you already have, it makes the story a lot more personal to you. Which I feel like, you know, a lot of material does that. That's why we watch sad movies. Like we've been there before. Movies about losing somebody we care about or losing a relationship. I mean, I feel like that's also why rom-coms do really well. Like we've all been in some type of, you know, friendship or, you know, loving relationship where something's gone wrong. Like we've lost a best friend, we've lost a mate, we've lost a partner. And I think that what's so incredible about sharing a story like that, and I've gravitated mostly towards horror and sci-fi because I just like reading it. I'm a voracious reader for it and also watching it. But I think just kind of writing stories where you can play on an emotion is really, really fun because everyone's going to take it to a different place.
I agree. I think writing horror is a ton of fun. Just examining what you find scary and why, and then trying to incorporate that into a story is a wonderful challenge. Yeah. I like what you had to say though. It's true that like different genres are so popular because it's like such a well universal feeling that we've all experienced. Yeah.
I think it's great that you have these like relatable characters to really draw your readers in because we identify with their struggle and then the shenanigans happen and we're hooked on it, you know?
Right. Right.
Yeah. And horror's just fun. It's fun to be scared. I mean, there's so much research about how fear is helpful to your body. I mean, horror kind of teaches you how to behave. Like we learn a lot of the things that we do from horror movies or scary stories. I mean, as a woman who drives alone, you know, you're checking your back seat in the dark before you get into your car. You know, you're not pulling into a scary, you're not opening that door. You come into a dark house, you turn on all the lights. Like you're not learning that by watching like Eat, Pray, Love. You're learning that by, you know, you're learning that by reading or watching horror, which I think is so fun. And
Absolutely.
there's a facility in Denmark called the Recreational Fear Lab that basically tests this theory all day long.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
it teaches toddlers, from a very young age, even toddlers are experiencing fear in fun ways. When you chase the toddler around the house, like they're running from fear and fun at the same
Right.
time. So
Right.
even that early, our body understands that fear is exciting. So that's so fun. I've always thought that point was always so fun about the genre, that like, especially in watching a scary movie in a theater with other people who are also scared,
Right.
is
Yeah.
is an experience, as opposed to being like, not that I don't love sitting on the couch watching films, but I think that experience, that collective experience, is very, very fun, which is why it's
Oh,
nice to talk to a
definitely.
fellow horror fan.
Yes. No, I have always loved watching horror movies. Never thought I could write the genre well though, because I am such a chicken, right? Like I'll watch horror movies, but like not by myself after dark.
There you go.
Right.
Definitely fall in the true crime
Yeah.
things, but I feel like so many women, like we're watching that and we're taking notes, like
Yeah.
how did they get her, and how is that not going to happen to me?
Right.
Right. Right. And then if you're an author, you're just like picking it
Oh,
apart.
and
Like,
if
how could
you're
I
an
use
author,
this? Yes. How could I
Yeah,
use
how
this
do I
later
use
on?
this? Oh, yeah, and it's just like, even writing that stuff, our Google search histories, please don't hold them against us.
Right. Right.
We
The most
don't mean the
random things
things
you
we
look
ask.
up. Yeah.
yes, I've definitely Googled how much blood can you lose before you die, and
Right?
Right.
You
how
need
to
to
Right.
do
know this.
heart
How
surgery
many
at home.
minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my
Oh
gosh. Right.
my gosh. Terrifying.
Yes.
I know the FBI when they have to weed out the writers from the chaff. Like I don't know how they do it.
Just like, oh, see if they wrote anything.
Right. Right. Yes.
Right. So can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? How do you go from like idea to finished draft?
Ooh,
Mhm.
my writing is it's interesting because I've discovered since writing this book, I've discovered a lot about myself, about the ways that I write, and my processes are never usually the same. I write mostly short form, so story collections, short stories, and anthologies, because I love kind of getting in late, and leaving early in a story, like dropping someone in and just making it as suspenseful as possible, or giving as much information as possible. But what I realize is, if you wait for the story to come to you, then it's a lot more hard work in the long run, because you're not writing the story that you want, you're writing the story that you're trying to write.
Okay.
So I've noticed that about myself, because so many times I've sat at a blank computer screen being like, I really am good, I promise.
Right.
And you get so frustrated. But
Yes.
when I was writing this book, I'd already had 3 of the stories in this book, my recent book called Love the Sinner, which is based on the 7 deadly sins and an extra sin. When I was writing that, I'd already had 3 of the stories, which were adapted from screenplays. My first life as a screenwriter. So I'm coming from that screenwriting world, and had already had these done, and I adapted them very quickly because clearly my material is already there. But writing the remaining ones, it was, this is the feeling that I want to evoke. So what story am I going to tell to get that? So it was almost reverse engineering it. And it was a lot more fun that way, to get to the end, as opposed to write it chronologically and say this, then that, then this, then that. And therefore, it was a lot easier to just say, oh, this is, people are going to feel this afterwards. And this is how I'm going to get them there. This is the twist, this is the surprise, or this is how it ends. How do we
Right.
get there? So I guess I work backwards. I'm a big reverse engineer person, I guess, these
Yeah.
days. I found it just easier in this process. So I've kind of stuck with that. I still outline like a beast. I will basically write out my story to death. But I will work from the back and forward. And how do we begin? Because I feel like once, especially when you write in a genre where there's twists and turns, and
Yeah.
there are hidden meanings or Easter eggs or things like that, it's interesting to plant them backwards.
Yeah.
Because you already know what you want the audience to uncover or discover, or your reader to be like, oh gosh, let me go back a few pages. What did she say again? Oh, now this makes sense.
Right.
It's like you have the like you got the answers to the test before the test came
Yeah.
out. So yeah, reverse engineering is my new thing. That's my new process.
Yeah, no, that is brilliant actually,
Mhm.
because like I know I need to know the end in order to write towards it. But
Mhm.
yeah, working backwards sometimes can be even more creative, you know. So
Yeah, it's been fun. I was like, oh, well,
yeah.
why didn't we do this the whole time?
I know, right?
Save myself a
I
lot of
know.
years.
Yeah.
But I guess
The writing process always changes for me a little bit each book. So I might have to try that out, the reverse
yeah,
Mhm.
engineering.
give it a
Yeah.
shot.
Oh yeah, I've
Sounds
definitely
fun.
like on some stories like wrote the end scene first.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it so much more solid. Um, okay,
Yeah.
that's really clever though to have figured that out and how like that works for you.
Yeah.
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 I mean,
I
I'll say clever or just bumbling and figured it out.
no,
I know how it
clever. It
really
is clever.
happened.
I
You
feel like
know, the end result is the reader going, wow, this person is brilliant. How did she see all that? Because they don't
right,
think about how we can go back and fix it. They read it the way they think we write it the way they read it.
Yeah.
right. Yeah. No, it is brilliant because like figuring out yourself to be able to like implement hacks like that
Mm-hmm.
is so
Mhm.
important. I feel
Yeah.
like we all do stuff as kids, and then as adults, we're like, why doesn't this work? But then you figure it out, and you really work with yourself rather than against yourself, and it makes such a
100%.
difference. Yeah.
And I
So
think
clever. Yeah.
And I think for myself, like the only story that I've written straight through without stopping, for this collection that had minimal, very,
Mhm.
very minimal edits to it was the story that begins this book called The Battle Between Boys. And that's really the first story outside of the other seven,
Yeah.
that I really was just like, this was all the way through. And I don't know. I don't know if I'll
Right.
experience that again. So I think that that's kind of the anomaly out of the rest of the book where I did work
Right.
very much backwards, but it's not going to be a thing that works for me all the
Right.
time.
Right.
I'm going to be that lucky.
What do you think is the most important part of writing?
Oh, geez. If you're happy with it, I think
Yeah.
it's you really have to be. I think as writers, we get very, very down on ourselves. We're very self-deprecating.
Mhm.
Um, because I think for us, our what literary success looks like is also very personal,
Yeah.
and it's a compare and contrast. Oh, our book came out at the same time. Like, why are they doing this? Or oh, that I had a story based on that a little bit, and now I feel like I can't write that. But I always feel like if you come back to the really old and sometimes exhausting adage of like it's almost like the right like nobody's reading. Like you have to be
Yeah.
passionate about what you're doing. And I think what's really interesting about the journey of deciding to write, like deciding to bring an idea to fruition is incredibly brave.
Yeah.
Whether or not you've had it published in a newspaper, a magazine, an anthology, published in a whole book, once you've decided this is my story or these are my ideas, you've written something. And I
Mhm.
think that we get where that self-deprecating thing comes from is, have I done enough? Is
Yeah.
it good enough? There's always that, enough phrase that comes knocking in, even when we've been successful at something. Like we've had a really, really great book. And, any author knows that, you have a book, it's coming out. You do the whole lead up to the book coming out. You're very excited. There's a lot of energy behind it. Now it's been 6 months since your book has come out, and like nobody's really as excited as they were in the first. And now you got to write the next book. And then that, like, it's
Right.
just the wheel keeps, it's an ebb and a flow. And I think just being brave and knowing there's a story in me, I'm going to get it out whatever way I can, whether it
Mhm.
takes me a year or it takes me like 2 weeks to finish it. If the bravery is there, then you're doing the right thing. Like, you're you're telling the right story for the right time, and you're the only person
Right.
to do that. So, I
Mhm.
mean, writing's really
Absolutely. I love that answer
I
so
love
much.
that answer. Yeah.
thanks. I kind of took it around 30,000 feet and then came back to a point. So I appreciate your patience with that.
No, I love focusing on bravery as like your one of your measures of success. Like that
Yeah.
you did the hard thing. Um because yes, you're so right. Success is so personal, and I mean Stephen King himself said write with the door closed, meaning like don't think about anyone reading your story while you're writing
Mhm.
it. Write the story as if no one's gonna read it, and then you'll be able to do it justice, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. And all the
Yeah.
rejections he had. I mean, I think like what
Right.
119 or something like that for Carrie. Like they were just like, no,
Yeah.
thank you.
Right.
And
Right.
then one person was like, yeah, I mean, well,
And
guess it's
what
a
a
good
great book.
story.
Yeah.
And there we go. So
Right.
It is really easy to get down on
Yeah.
yourself of like, am I even a good enough author? Is this even
mhm.
good enough to put out there? Is, you know,
Right.
will you be judged really hard for this?
Yeah.
Like, but you got to do it anyway because,
hmm
like you said, there's that story in you, and only you can tell it, and you just have to do your best and keep trying. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
but yeah, this is not for the faint of heart.
It's not. And it's you putting your baby out there. And I had a fellow
Right.
author describe it to me, and I kind of like took it and I giggled about it because I was just like, oh my God, like when you think about it, it really is like that. But it took me a while to come to that realization. It was a last Stoker Con. And I was walking back to my hotel room and I was like, oh my gosh, they're right. If you've ever watched a plastic surgery show, like on E, the ones that are just like the two men that are just like,
Mm.
oh, I'm fixing somebody else's bad work.
Right.
The markers that they mark people up with on camera, like this is what we need to fix, and this is what we need to fix, and this is what we
Right.
need to fix.
Right.
It's so incredibly vulnerable.
Yes.
And they were like, that's what it's like to put your book out there.
Right.
And I was like,
Oh,
I
geez,
understand.
you're right.
And then I was walking back to my hotel and I was like, oh my God, it is.
Right.
Because you're putting your work out
Yeah.
there for somebody to just be like, this is what's wrong with it. And I
Dissect.
didn't like this
Yes.
part. So I was like, yeah, that's really where that bravery comes in because it's like, not
Yeah.
everybody's going to like it, but I'm passionate
Right.
about it anyway. So,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
was like, what a weird analogy, but it works.
But
I mean,
it's
it
so
really
It
apt.
really
Yes.
does work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
is very correct. Scary.
Like just
It is
you're almost
scary.
naked
Yeah.
self up on TV while people just like rip apart like everything that's possibly wrong with you.
Right.
Yeah.
Every flaw.
Oh, don't like it.
Right.
It's gonna haunt me now. Thanks.
I'm sorry.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah.
Not my
Sharing the
intention.
nightmare. Oh
That's
goodness.
fine. Yes. All right. Would you say your writing is more character driven or more plot driven?
Ooh. Gosh, it really depends on the story. There's a character that I really fell in love with in one of my stories, called Free Weight, that's in the latest collection, Love the Sinner. And in this book, and there's not really one character you're really rooting for. Like they're all
Mhm.
pretty terrible people, which is funny because everybody's like, oh, don't write unlikable characters. And I was like, we all know an unlikable person. We're going to relate. It's going to be fine.
Right. Right.
But I really fell in love with this character because it was just watching them. And I feel like we've all done it with ourselves to some degree, just watching us make the worst choices for ourselves.
Right.
Like we know what we're supposed to do, but we don't follow through on that because we'd rather do this because this is easy.
Right.
Like
Right.
sadness is easy, or being,
Yeah.
being grumpy is easy, or taking a walk and listening to upbeat music is the same amount of time, but it's which one are you going to do when you're already grumpy?
Right.
So I think like that type of story works with the character and the character driving that.
Mhm.
But something like a plot for a story that I have coming out in a collection in a few months, is really plot driven. It's you're following the story because the story, you have to follow the story because it's almost like a puzzle. So
Right.
you're following almost the character is almost playing along with you. You're not ahead of the character at all. They're not leading you anywhere. You're just in the thick of it with them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that plot is driving. So I think that really drives. I guess my answer is just both, because it
Right.
really depends on the reaction you're trying to get out of somebody. Do you want somebody to follow along with this character, or is this story's end game more important to you? And sometimes it's
Right.
both. Sometimes you have a really compelling character and a really compelling plot, and that's like the jackpot. That's what we always
Yeah, no, the ideal definitely I think would
yeah,
be to
and
have
this
both.
winning all around, but it doesn't usually
Yeah,
pan out that way. But both is probably where I would say yeah.
agreed. I love characters. That's what I relate to and fall in love with. But if there was no plot, then it's like, oh,
Womp womp.
that would be a different. Yeah, that would be like a certain mood I'd have to schedule that for.
Yeah.
Character vignette. Oh, that's gonna be the future when I'm
Yeah.
feeling it. Yeah.
Not doing it right now. Yeah.
Right. Who is your favorite author and what do you feel they do best?
Ooh. My favorite author, probably of all time, is Ray Bradbury.
Hmm.
I've loved. That was one of the first sci-fi horrors I got into. I had a book of The Illustrated Man. My sister had The Illustrated Man, which is a collection of stories. And I just feel like he wrote just way ahead of his time.
Yeah.
He's an excellent. His prose is very conversational.
Hmm.
It's very beautiful. It's very evocative, and it's very simple. There's not a lot of like overly flowery language
Right.
or something that's trying to be so much more deep than it is. But I really fell in love with his work, and I really loved the sci-fi aspect to it, because
No, his
things that he wrote were just
imagination is amazing.
out of this
Yeah.
world. And his work ethic. I mean, I think it was like 2 weeks before he passed away, he had written a story every single day since he was 11.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, what? I can't even. I'm in this.
Right.
I wore these joggers yesterday.
Yes, right. I
I
know. My aspirational self couldn't even imagine. Yes.
But that's my favorite. It really taught me how to build worlds, to pace a story,
Right.
to really write something that was emotional
Yeah.
at the same time as being very educational, really
Yeah.
thought-provoking work, really sad work. A lot of his stories contain a lot of grief, a lot of sorrow.
Hmm.
So I mean, I wonder how autobiographical or how much of that himself he was putting into those things.
Right.
But if it's if anything I've been inspired by is his work with just world building is
Yeah.
I would say out of this world, but that sounds dumb when I say world building. But it's like nothing I've ever read before. And like
Right.
I said, I'm a pretty voracious author or reader with a lot of sci-fi and horror authors, but
Hmm.
I don't think I've found anything to match that just scale
Yeah.
in
No,
literary form.
his imagination was like unparalleled. I really feel
Mhm.
like we have DVDs at my sister's house that was like this Canadian like company made a bunch
Mhm.
of Ray Bradbury stories
Oh, the
into like
Ray Bradbury Theater.
yeah, and so
Yes.
like we have like those DVDs and I watch them and I'm just like, how does he come up with all this stuff? It's so amazing. Yeah.
And there was a story called The Velt, which was about two little kids.
Hmm.
They were living in a house that was like space age house, and everything was like technology, technology, technology. And there
Yeah.
was a room where the children would go in and they can create any landscape, and it was very holographic.
Right.
And they created this like African I don't know what it was. It was just like this big plain. There was like gazelles and zebras and lions, and that was their play place. And
Mhm.
the kids were really defiant and really bratty, and the parents were like, okay, well, we're going to shut this off. And the
Right.
kids were like, oh no, you're not. And then the spoiler, the room, like
Yeah.
takes over, but he had written that story in the 40s.
Right.
So it's
Right.
like saying
Right.
we're in the
Yeah.
70s. How would you even, and we look at smart houses now,
Right.
you know?
He was,
It's
yeah, he was right on track for like imagining what the future could be
yeah,
for like
100%.
that.
Hey Alexa, turn down my shades. Hey Siri, like
Right.
fix my phone.
Right.
Like it's wild. So that's where I always go into being like, yeah, he knew what he was doing.
Yes. Yes. And I love that, like you said, his writing is so accessible as well. It's not
Yeah.
ostentatious. It's not showy for the sake
Mm.
of being showy. Yes. Love that answer.
What would you say you've learned from the writing process?
Humility. Not that I didn't have it before in heaps, but I think that you learn to not punish yourself for it being what it is. Because I think as authors, writers in general, whether you're a screenwriter or a literary author or a poet, you start out
Mhm.
with a really excellent kernel of an idea, and you're like, this is going to be amazing, and this, I'm going to pull this into it, and this, it's almost like making a recipe, and then you get to a point and the story just stops, like it doesn't go
Mhm.
anywhere. Or if I just had this one other ingredient, I could finish this story, but I don't know what that ingredient is, like a secret ingredient.
Right. Right.
And I think being okay with the fact that some stories have to sit. Like,
Right.
not every story is going to get completed when you sit down and you complete, you want to complete the story, or you want to answer a submission call. Oh, it's about, weather, being trapped in a weather twister or tornado or
Right.
something fearsome. And you're like, oh, I have this perfect idea, and it doesn't complete itself, or you're missing the ingredient and you miss the submission window.
Right.
Or, I mean, it's just being okay with, letting stories sit. And I've had so many stories that I've written half of, 2/3 of,
Right.
where, 2 or 3 years later, I've come back and been like, oh, let me grab the first piece of that story because now I know what the ingredient is. So hold on to those.
Right.
If you're any writer, you have like 1,800 half written in notebooks in your home. Um, it, like, hold on to them because they're going to be something someday, but they can't all have their moment in the sun every single time.
No, I think that's wonderful advice because I really do feel like sometimes we're not at the level we need to be to write certain stories,
Oh,
and that's
100%.
okay, right? Our skill level is just not as matching our idea of complexity all the time,
Hmm.
right? And so like you said, sitting on those stories and then coming back to them at a later time and being like, oh, I know exactly how to do this now that I didn't know before to make this work.
Right. And also reading other people's work helps too.
Yeah.
If like if you write, you should be reading.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we learn so much off of, and not to, pull off try to pull off somebody else's style, or, their story theory in a way, but just being like, oh, like that's a really interesting way to build that character. I like how they did that, and
Right.
incorporating that into your own work, and maybe that might be the secret ingredient for that story. But
Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes we're not capable of telling the story that we think we are,
Right,
and
right.
that's
And that's
also like
right,
I
right.
swear
But
I know all about this topic.
yes, I feel like there's a certain, like, to do it justice though, we have to be at
Hmm.
certain levels for different story ideas. And I really like that advice because like they say, like, great artists steal. So it's not about stealing the ideas or
Hmm.
stealing, the paint strokes, but it's about like absorbing and incorporating all these different writing styles, all these different
Hmm.
skills that other authors have. As we read, we can like pick up on, oh, like you said, I love the way they built up that character, or I like how they just like divulge this world fact, or little different things that you can then incorporate and work into your style and your voice and your
Hmm.
story. Because like that's what they tell you when they're like, oh, how do I find my voice? Like you kind of copy and like mimic other people's voices until
Mm,
your own voice
right.
emerges.
Yeah.
I feel like that's why we have to go through our fan fiction stage. Is that
Right.
we study the masters and we try it
Yes.
and we grow from that, but we can't skip that really crucial self-insert bad poetry phase.
Right,
You have
right. Oh
to.
my God. I think every author that we talk to has that cringy like phase. And not saying that fan fiction is cringy, but like everyone kind of goes through that phase, like in middle school, early high school, early 20s, where they're like, oh, I wrote this story about myself. And for me, it was instinct. So something more embarrassing than that. I wrote a story with me in instinct, yeah.
It was probably really good. Could have
I think
been
for my age it was. I think for my age it was very good. But
could have been a teen movie. Don't give up.
right. Yes. No. I think that's a very great point that you made, though, Kirsha, that we all kind of, use someone else's world or characters to develop our skills.
Yeah.
Well, we are essentially artists. We need to
Yeah.
look at art and learn how to do the brushstrokes and learn the techniques and, the pacing. And like, there's so many, like, writing is so complex and there's no one way. And,
No. Yeah.
but it is by looking at other work that you learn how to do it.
Yeah, and I always tell everyone read widely, like, because you can learn something from every genre. I mean, obviously you can learn from the classics, but you can also learn like how to build relationships from romance, how to world build from fantasy and sci-fi, how to pace from thrillers and horrors. Like you can learn something so valuable from each genre. So I tell people, like, even if you're not going to write that genre, you should read it because you're going to learn something from it.
Yeah, especially just character arc. Like that should be happening in your stories too. It shouldn't just be. And I'm only speaking from the genres that I write, but it shouldn't just be for the scare factor. It should also be your character needs to be doing something. Like we need to be, even if we don't like them, they have to have some sort of progress. Unless that is the story, that they just been the same person the whole time. And that's the terror.
Yeah. Oh, the horror of it. Right. But yeah, no, that is very true that like, you have, all stories should go from the character reacting to then the second half they're acting and making decisions and making plans and doing all of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Hero's journey.
Yeah. Well, they even talk about it in the 3-act structure as well. If you could tell a new author one thing, what would it be?
Submit your stories. If you see a call or you see a magazine, I feel like that's kind of how we all not got started, but I feel like that's how we can gauge what works and what doesn't. Because you won't get into every submission call. Your story won't be in every anthology, but those people are going to tell you what didn't work and what did work for them.
Right.
Most submission calls will give you a little bit of feedback. I mean, you're not going to get like a 2-page note to incorporate into your story, but they'll give you like a 1 or 2 sentence and be like, it felt like 2 different stories. If you had a connecting piece, it would probably have fit better for us, or, X, Y, and Z. And I think that those are the building blocks that you grow from. And even if you do make it into an anthology, that's such a confidence booster and a validation piece that will help you continue writing. But so is the note. So also recognize that both of those can be true and you're still a good writer. It's just we're not always going to put our best foot forward, or there's always places for us to grow and learn. Any author at any stage is learning something new. I mean, you take Stephen King, if you follow his social media, like he's always blown away by a book that he didn't write. Somebody else did it. And it was, the last one was an author that I think that was their first book or their second book, and they were just like, he was just like, oh my gosh, like this one was. But like, it's things like that. If we, getting that feedback and submitting and putting your stuff out there, I guess I just keep coming back to the bravery piece of it.
Yeah.
Because if we don't try, we're never going to grow. And I think in the growth in writing is really what you strive for, not just getting published. The growing as a writer.
Agreed. I love that advice. I think that so I was able to study creative writing in school, And the most valuable part is the feedback that you get. It's the
Yeah,
workshops that you do. And I think that any way that you can kind of incorporate that into your writing process is going to be super helpful.
very much so.
Mhm.
So everyone's pretty busy. How do you make time for writing?
I forego sleep. That's not the answer, the healthy answer.
Mhm.
Oh, that's my answer.
That's
Yeah.
not the answer. I mean, it's really when you find the time for it. At the moment, I'm solely running a horror online magazine. So it's, I've been very slow to complete the writing things that I need to do right now. But before that role, it was, finding the time to be like, I have 2 hours. Even if I write a paragraph, I was working towards something. Or if I was outlining, then I know I can go back and kind of start from the outline. Okay, well, where do we end up? Okay, now I can start writing backward. But I think that for me, I find the time when I have it, because I feel like a lot of it for any human, and I hate to keep talking pandemic forward, but I think what that really made us do was either realize how much time there is in the day or how
Mhm.
little time there is in the day. I don't think it's the same
Right.
for everybody. But I feel like there's a lot of things we can do with our day where, and this, forgive me for if it sounds very preachy, but there are things that we could do. We could watch films all day, or we could watch Netflix all day, or we could kind of lay around all day, all of which are good.
Mhm.
I highly recommend both of those things, but it's choosing to make the time to write. And like I
Mhm.
said, even if it's little, even if it's like I should go to bed, if I have a half an hour before I should go to bed or before my brain completely loses it, I'm going to
Right.
write something down. So I think for me, like finding the time is almost making myself find the time.
Right.
And being like, I could scroll through TikTok before I sleep, or I could watch
Right.
48 minutes of TikTok, or I could get something down in my laptop. And it's making the choice is it's really hard these days because you do want
Yeah.
a little quiet time, but
Yeah.
making the time's been the best for me. Is making myself do that.
I agree that you really have to make it a priority because it's so easy to push aside and be like, I'll get to that tomorrow. Mhm.
Yep.
Totally understand that. Yes. Guilty. I've done that way too many times. Yeah.
Show of hands. Yes.
Right. What would you say is your favorite part of writing?
Probably the outlining piece is
Yeah.
really, I'm either a 3 or a 5 act structure person. Um, and I love kind of figuring out where my beat points are, where
Hmm.
the rising action is, like where that's really going to be like where we start kicking things off.
Yeah.
How little or how much exposition am I going to start the story with? How much story am I giving you at the forefront? Um, do I need to front load it in order for you to be invested, or is where I drop you into the story enough investment? And I think that that really makes it fun to, even though I'm in the reverse engineering process as of now,
Hmm.
um, I think that's very fun to sketch out what your entire story could look like. I always say could because halfway through we usually change our stories, or we
Yes.
add
Yes.
something,
Absolutely.
or omit something. But I think that's such a fun visual. I'm a very visual learner. I'm also a big analog person, so I like writing it down, like
Yeah.
physically writing it down. I think that's a really great exercise for me to say, oh, I need to build this out a little bit here. So visually having that entire outline in front of me before I begin a
Yeah.
story is really my favorite part, because then probably right then what doesn't work or what you haven't explained to it.
Yeah.
It's like telling our friends that don't write a story and they're like, but why? But why? Like that doesn't why is
Right.
it happening?
Yes.
And then you're trying not to get frustrated, but then it makes you realize what holes you have in
Yes.
your story that aren't clear. So that's what outlining does for me. So that's my favorite
Yeah.
part.
Love that answer.
Mhm.
Um, I would agree. I like to figure things out somewhat before I begin because, like I said, if I don't know the ending or what happens next, then I just get writer's block and just stare at the screen with existential dread. Like, what am I doing with my life and why? You know,
contemplating my life choices.
Right. What brought me to this point? You know,
God, how did we end up here?
Yeah. So I also do a little bit of outlining, and I think that it's helpful because, like I always say, if you can't outline before you write your story, outline before you edit, because you'll be able to see like, oh, I have so much of this character, but barely any of this character, or subplots. You'll find that they're really unbalanced, and it's very easy to see in the outline. So that's very easy to help with the thinking of how do we solve this now.
Outlining is definitely the exciting part because you've got this like new fresh all these ideas and they're pouring out of you and you're like, yes, it's brilliant, and you're like, I'm the best writer ever, and it's you've got this excitement over this story, and then you're like, now I have to write it.
Right. Now I have to make it good.
Now I actually have to elongate this page and a half of notebook writing.
Right.
Now you have to figure out how and why.
Yeah.
But I think that's what's so interesting about like just writing in general is how rewarding it is. Like I said, even if it doesn't get published or, you know, you finished it and you haven't found a home for your story, I think the fact that something that was in your brain is now living outside of your brain is so cool.
It is. So I think one of the best feelings in the world is holding your book and being like, I made this. Like, oh my gosh, yeah.
You did it. Or even just like having somebody read like, you know, your Word doc, you know, and you just finished it and being like, I just finished this and I think it's amazing when you read it.
Right.
It's great. Or reading it to somebody. Like that was my thing for a while. I'm like, my friend Lori's very tolerant. I'm just like, I'm going to read this to you. She's like, great. Super supportive. But it, you know, it's that excitement of just having what started off as something incredibly nebulous in your brain to something that is a living, breathing document, because it's always going to change. It's going to get edited, but just to have that out of you is just, it's so cool
it feels like magic.
It does. I mean, our movies, our TV shows, they all became, you know, they all were born somewhere.
Yeah. No, I love that.
All right, so that was your favorite part of writing. What is your least favorite part of writing?
Well, if I say the actual writing part, that just makes me sound like a weirdo.
No, I think all writers understand that.
Honestly, editing. It's the worst part because it makes you feel like I am not the greatest writer alive. I'm actually the dumbest person who've ever lived. I do recommend the if you are working with Word, the read aloud feature. Word. That is really helpful for me as someone who double types words, especially things like for, the, and I don't see them when I'm rereading it. So editing is rewriting, you know, it's like that doesn't work. Or even getting edits back from a manuscript you feel is done. And then somebody coming back and not criticizing, being like, oh, this isn't clear. Can you make this a little bit more clear? And then being like, oh, you're right. This isn't clear. Like here, I thought this was like.
I was done with this.
Right. I've just written the Iliad and the Odyssey. Why is there a problem with it? But I think the editing obviously is it's not a part that I hate or least favorite. It's just probably emotionally the hardest.
Yeah.
Because again, you know, marking up your body and saying this is what's wrong with it, fix it, or here, let me fix it, or have someone say, here's how I would fix it.
Yeah.
Is also a little bit hard because you're just like, well, how would you know? Like, these are my characters. So it's a little bit emotional. And I feel like I'm already an emotional mess. I'm a Cancer. So I'm emotional anyway. But I think that's probably it's the least favorite because it's the most emotional part of the process.
Right. No, understood. I'm an editor, but I hate editing my own stuff. I love editing for other people, like taking their ideas, seeing where it can be strengthened and polished up and making it shine,
Sure.
all that stuff. But when it comes to my stuff, like, putting on the analytical, critical hat and being like, this isn't good enough. It is not. And then you have
Yeah.
to read it like 50 times, like, so it is most people's least favorite, I will say.
Yep. It just sends me over the edge. Like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna pop over to the Dunkin' and grab myself a personal dozen and let me
Right.
be
We need to comfort eat
undisturbed
to get
for the
through
rest
this.
of the
Yeah.
evening, if you don't mind.
Right.
And it
Totally
is so
understand that.
important to find an editor that you click with, who
Yeah.
knows what they're doing.
Yes.
Because if you go for the yes man who is just like going to praise you really hard and be
Right.
like, this is the best thing I've ever read and you're amazing, like that feels really good, but they're not doing their job. Like,
Yeah,
Right.
and it's not
like
helpful to you.
it's not helpful. But I feel like a lot of baby authors fall into that trap of going with the one who makes them feel the best and doesn't make them really
Do the
take a
hard
hard
work.
look at their manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, you also don't want an editor who's going to rip you apart and make you
Right.
like dread writing ever again,
Right.
and like make you feel so bad about yourself that you're going to quit. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I've had those
Yeah.
conversations where I've had a press say, "Did you want to read the notes or just the red lines?" I was like,
Right.
"Oh,
Right.
probably just the red lines
Yeah.
from this
Yeah.
particular person because I've seen their notes for other people."
Right.
So
Yeah.
just the red line is fine. So yeah, I mean it's both ends of the spectrum, and especially as a new writer, you don't really know which is which
Mhm.
until
Right.
I feel like that's why we have like the second editing that goes through. It's because first editing might have been like for elongating the story or rectifying pieces that
Right.
didn't work. Second pass is like making sure, and then maybe it's grammatical.
Mhm.
But I feel like all of those checks and balances help
Yeah.
to just give you that push to be like, this is the story that was in your head.
Yes. Yes.
And
A good
bring that
editor's
to fruition.
Yeah, a good editor's job is to make sure that what's in your brain is on the page, because like as we're writing, we know it's supposed to be there. So a good editor will just
Mhm.
point out like, hey, this is not in the story. What did you have in mind? I always tell people get a free sample edit, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
See how they comment on stuff, and if you accept that well, if they will work well with you, and see what they're actually doing, right? What they're willing to
Mhm.
do for an edit. That's
Mhm.
really, really super helpful, because like some people will gladly take your money, slap some commas on there, and call it a day. But we want the true
Mhm.
edit to happen.
Or if they're really sneaky, they'll run it through like an editing program and
Right.
just hit accept all and then send it back to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've had that happen and I caught it through the sample edit. I was like,
Yeah.
wait, what did you do here? You thought like
Yeah.
Right.
I've
Because the
had that for
computer will make
screenwriting.
yeah.
I've
Yeah.
had
The
that for
computer.
screenwriting too, where it's like, okay, well, this is a vernacular that happens in like
Yeah.
1930s Georgia with ethnic
Yeah.
characters. And why
Yeah.
is this like, this is not what
Right.
they would say. Clearly,
Right.
you weren't looking or you thought I was making a mistake.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's tough. That really is hard. It really is very hard.
But a good sample edit will kind of show like where they lean on like actually understanding what's going on
Mhm.
too. So that's
Yeah.
super
Are
helpful.
you immersed in the material? Because that's helpful.
Right, right,
And
right.
then on top of that, you have to consider where that advice is coming from.
Yes.
Is this advice from someone who is not a writer? Do they
Mhm.
even read? Or like, have they done it themselves? Or, like,
Right.
I had one good friend who incorporates so much humor into her books. And she had a reader who was just like, you need to tone that back. Like this, like no one's going to take you seriously if you are making so many poop jokes. And she's like, no, this is what I meant to write, So
Right.
you have
Mhm.
to be careful not to let other people dictate
Yeah.
to you what your
Yeah.
story is.
Yeah. Pushback is important. You do have the control to do that. And I think a lot of people don't utilize that
Yeah.
or advocate for themselves. It'd be like, no, this is what I really like my character to say, or this is the arc that I'd like them to have.
Right.
To know when to take the advice and to leave it on the table. That's also really hard.
Yeah.
Because
No, I would.
you want your book out and you want it in there. You're like, I'll say anything, I guess. You have to
Right.
learn to
No, that's very true. I
advocate.
always say it's a conversation. Like, I will explain why I think a change should be made and
Mm-hmm.
why I think something else would work better. But if they're like, no, I'm doing this for XYZ reason, I'm like, that's more than fair, right? Like, more than
Yeah.
good enough for me. Because, like, at the end of the day, like, I'm just the editor, right? It's your story with your name on it, and you have to, like, be behind it 100%.
Editing so hard.
Yeah, no, it definitely can be hard. What would you say influences your writing?
Ooh, gosh, it's always influences my writing. I guess what influences my stories
Mm-hmm.
is always a burden. I think I always feel very, I think as women, I feel like we internalize a lot. We hold on to a lot. We're always doing 14 different things. And I think that always kind of comes out in my writing. My characters are very burdensome. Either they're walking around with
Right.
something from the past, or they just, haven't let something go, or they've got a big task ahead of them, or they are people pleasers, things of that nature. And I think that my personal journeys, I think I would be remiss to say that, my personal journeys definitely affect my characters and what they go
Right.
through. But I feel like we kind of all do that. We write people, or characters based on what we've been through, or sometimes who we wish we could be. And I
Right.
think that is what influences my writing, is a possible catharsis, I guess, is my answer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very good answer.
Absolutely.
In under 3 minutes. I'm so proud of myself. Like,
Yeah.
answered the
No.
question directly, and I
Oh
did
no, that was great.
No, I completely love that answer. There's been more than once where I've like written something and then I stop and go like, am I working through something right now that
Right. Yes.
huh?
Oh goodness. Yeah. The self-analysis we didn't realize we were doing. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah. It's
yes.
the therapy we met
Character.
along the way.
Right.
Why are
Yes.
you doing
Yes.
this to me? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm just working through something right now.
Right. The poor characters. How do you deal with writer's block?
I think writer's block for me, and this is going to sound weird, but I think writer's block for me is, it's almost what they call, like, I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but it's called like the burnt toast theory. Burnt toast is like, you burnt the toast and that took you more time at home. And by, being late to where you needed to go, you missed like the traffic jam or the collision
Right.
pile up or something like that.
Right.
And I always kind of think of writer's block as being like, don't push it.
Right. Okay.
And that once I started looking at that and not being like self-punishing or self-deprecating about not
Yeah.
writing something, when I turned that around to be like, it's just not in you
Right.
today, or there's no
Right.
story there today, or whatever you're going to write, it's not going to be what you want it to.
Right.
But I mean, you could sit there and just kind of like free write and be like, hope something catches out of that. And some days I've been successful with that, but it's because
Yeah.
I pushed it and it didn't feel good.
Yeah.
So I'll always say it's not the day.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm so tired of being hard on myself. I mean, I'm
Yes.
mid-40s, so I'm like,
Yeah.
I've earned my time to like not be hard on myself and just be like,
Right. Right.
it's not the time today to be depressed all day because you couldn't figure out a story or feel unaccomplished when
Right.
there's a whole rest of the day for you to enjoy.
Yes. No.
from them.
I think that a lot of times writer's block is kind of like ourselves, like we get stuck because we're trying to force something that doesn't fit for the story or fit for the character or something. We're trying to force it.
Yeah.
So it is a good indicator to be like, wait, what am I doing and why? Like,
Yeah.
let's stop, let's reevaluate, and let's take a day to rest. Like, rest should be as intentional as work is, right? We need to give ourselves a break.
100%. Yes. Yes.
I've
Yes.
burned myself out on writing, I've burned myself out on editing, and it's a lot longer to recover if you get to that point than if you would have just taken a day to rest.
Yes.
Mhm.
Agreed. Put that in the chat.
Right, right.
Tell everybody. Tell
Put
everybody.
it on a monument, make it an icon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Put it on a tapestry, t-shirts.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to stop and like take care of
Mm.
your life, work through
Yeah.
something else, and like uncork that creativity. But you're right. You're right. You can't force it. You will
Right.
not be happy with what you forced out most of the time. I
Yeah.
mean, there is something to be said about getting it on the page. You can edit it later, but like not everyone can do that. Sometimes you just need to take a deep
Mhm.
breath and try again tomorrow.
Yeah, I love the skip ahead. I'll leave myself notes like this conversation needs to happen. Skip to another part that I can write.
Mhm.
Or like, yeah, confrontation between these two characters. Skip ahead.
Yeah.
I
Highlight
do
and
that
then
all the time.
continue
Yes,
on.
yes, yes, yes.
Smart.
Yeah, right. Add this here. Yeah. Now, do you have any writing advice that you hate?
Oh, not that I hate, but I feel the sense of like urgency to write or having a writing schedule or there's a certain amount of writing discipline you have to have in order to be a good
Right,
writer.
right,
I feel like that's so I think that's a little harsh, Monique. Don't say demonizing.
right.
I feel like it works against what people's natural flow is, and it's almost an admonishment as opposed to an encouragement.
Right,
Like,
right.
like, oh, you should be writing an hour a day. Okay, well, what if I don't have an hour a day? What if my hour a
Yeah.
day goes to my kids or my significant other or to my
Right.
own health or to a parent that I'm caring for because they're elderly? Like, what?
Right.
That's my hour. Like, I write in the half an hour that I have when everybody's asleep. Is that okay?
Right,
But I
right.
feel like, it also makes us very apologetic or that we're not at the echelon of the good
Yeah.
writers because we're not doing this. Also, please stop asking people to wake up at 5 a.m. Like,
Right.
no,
I'm tired.
you find your tribe of 5 a.m. writers. Don't invite
Right.
me. I will leave that email closed and delete it.
I will
Don't
laugh
send
about it.
me
Yeah.
like a Google invite. I enjoy my sleep.
Yeah.
And like I said, that works for a certain people where they're just like, if I don't write at this amount of time, nothing's going to get done. And I understand we all have the same 24 hours in a day.
But some people are morning people, some people are night people.
Some people are
like,
night people.
yeah, I feel like advice like that is very like one type of person, and it does not apply broadly, right?
Oh,
So
no.
it's not helpful because most
Nope.
people, yeah, like if I'm up at 5 a.m., it's because I didn't sleep that night. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not waking up at 5 a.m. thinking like, oh, this is the optimal time to write. My brain's functioning. No, like that's
No,
not the
absolutely
case.
not. And I will roll over and be back asleep at 5:03, guaranteed.
Right,
So
right.
wake me up with my laptop.
Yeah, yeah.
But
no.
like I said, like I feel like that strong, like super disciplined
Right.
ask of people is unrealistic.
Yeah.
Especially when we're all trying to hustle to do something else. Some of us have full-time jobs. Some of us have full-time jobs and hustle. Some of us have children. Some of us have,
Yeah.
like I said, parents. Some of us working 2 jobs.
Right.
It's, finding it when you can is going to make it more passionate when you're doing it. It's just like going to school, being like, you have to get up as a child and go to school at 7:00 in the morning.
Right.
It's the same drudgery. Like, don't make art drudgery. If you put that type of spin on it, we're less creative. We're forced to perform. And then we run into things like writer's block because everybody else that does this is a great writer. Are they just exhausted and they're not telling anybody?
Yeah, no, and I would say like we should never follow shoulds because should is a preference, right? It's not like should according to who, first of all, right? Should according to who. Secondly, like that's how they prefer to do it. Doesn't mean that's how everyone has to do it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that we try to shame ourselves into doing things when like positive reinforcement would work a lot better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we do want to give you the opportunity to let everyone listening on along at home know where they can find out more about you and your book. So why don't you go ahead and share your socials and your website if you have one?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna share my little book.
Yeah.
He's my little Scully book. I call him my little Scully because he's my little Scully.
Yeah.
So this is Love the Sinner. This is available at Waterstones, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, wherever you get your
Yeah.
fine books online. And then my socials, I'm Moshaty pretty much everywhere. Instagram and the artist formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah.
I'm there as well. I'm on BridgetScapePress.com. I'm one of their authors. I have a bio there. This is where Bridgetscape Press published this book, and they're so motivating and so supporting and excellent indie horror press. So if you ever want to submit to any of their calls, you definitely should. They're great. And then you can also find me in 160 Black Women in Horror, which was published last year. Everyone's like, there's Black women don't write horror. Well, there's 160 of us that we found in here, and just alphabetically, luck of the draw, I'm behind Toni Morrison.
Nice.
Alphabetically
Yes.
only. But yeah, I'm on most socials as Moshaty, like I said, Instagram, Twitter. My group Nyx Horror Collective is on the socials as well as Nyx Horror, NYX Horror. We are a horror collective of women over 40 who are creating content in the horror genre. We have a fellowship with Stowe Story Labs, which helps screenwriters develop and produce their projects with the help of mainstream producers from Netflix, from Amazon, whatnot. We have a fellowship for a woman identifying writer who is working on a film. A lot of us are, like I said, can't leave our jobs. We can't afford these fellowships that are like $3-4 grand and take off from work and work on our career. So, but we've established that so you can. And then we also have our Night Tide magazine, which is an online horror magazine. Comes out every Friday, and it's a low and slow horror. We're not a huge content churn. News every 30 seconds. I work mostly with academics. Lecturing is also what I do for horror cinema. Women's trauma in horror cinema is what I lecture on collegiately. And then, that comes out every Friday, and that's nighttidemag.com. So that was a lot.
Sounds like you have some amazing projects. Yeah.
Which is why I forego sleep to write.
Right. Because you have so much you're doing. Right. I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you.
It's been so fun. Thank you so much, Kirsten. Thank you so much, Julia. It's been wonderful.
Yeah. And thank you to everyone who's listening along at home. Remember, there's more than one way up a mountain, and our next episode will be releasing on Friday. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, you can find us on social media at The Tell Not Show, or you can email us at thetellnotshow@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach, and can be found at hijinksrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to 4, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks, and see you next time.